I've learned that in my 80 some years of life, what's really important is kindness, because kindness generates a certain empathy as well as understanding. And to me, that's one of the key components of love. So I'm big for kindness.
All right, so I'm just gonna clap real quick,
Yeah.
just loudly, so it'll sync up all the audio. All right.
Okay, we're on.
Yes, we're on. So, uh, my name is Michael Knez, interviewing Tom Knez,
Grandude, also known as Grandude.
also known as Grandude. What's the date today? Even today is the 15th, June 15th.
You got me. Yeah,
Yeah,
let's check our cell phones.
yeah, always June 14th.
14th. Okay,
Okay, and we're at Spring Lake Park, correct?
that's right. In Santa Rosa, California, 95409.
Okay, all right. So, what's your full name?
My full name is Thomas Richard Knez. It could have been Knezachek, but my dad shortened it.
Okay, we'll get into that in a second. You know, I never knew your name was Richard all this time.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know how I didn't know that. Okay, let's start with the basics then. Where were you, when and where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois on September 20th, 1937. And the hospital that I was born in was the first actual maternity hospital devoted only to pregnancies in the United States. And it was affiliated with the University of Chicago. And the obstetrician who started this became world famous for all of his work with delivering babies. Prior to that time, most women were delivering at home because they were afraid to go to hospitals because the mortality rate was so high because there weren't good sterile practices instituted in hospitals. So this was a game changer. I mean, very few women today, I believe, have babies at home.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
All right, who are your parents? Who are my grandparents? Who are your parents?
Well, my dad was John Joseph Knez, or Knezachek until he changed the name to Knez.
Okay.
And my mom was Gertrude Florence Vod. Her maiden name was Vaad, Vod.
Okay. So I know we've talked about this a little bit, but and I've heard this from my father, but can you tell me the story very quickly on how our last name got changed from Nezacek to Nez?
Well, because Dad was affiliated with AT&T, and he had a lot of business with other companies, his name became an issue because of the spelling. He was always having to tell people how to spell it correctly. They were always asking him, how do you spell that? So he just decided, screw it. I'm just going to cut off the last 15 syllables and shorten it to 4 syllables, Knez,
Yeah.
and simplify that. So that's the origin. However, like his brother didn't shorten the name. He kept the name
Oh.
Knezachek, and he was not involved in business or technology or
Okay.
anything.
Okay. So interesting. My joke about it growing up is at least we're not destined to be NFL punters.
Yeah,
so, so,
yeah.
so, you know, it's been interesting through my life, just being a Nez my entire life, and probably you too, how those four letters Knez will trip up just about anybody who sees it for the first time
Well,
and tries to pronounce it.
interestingly enough, I have seen a radio station with the call letters
Yeah,
Knez. It's in Santa Maria, California.
interesting. I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, all right. So I found this out that your grandma Gertrude, her maiden name was Vod, but it wasn't originally that.
Right.
Can
It
you
was Johnston.
Johnston, can you briefly tell me the story about
Well,
that?
Mom's dad was a very righteous Christian man, and he was an honorable man. And apparently, there was another person in the neighborhood named Johnston who was not an honorable guy. And he, dad, my mom's dad kept getting many times bills sent to the neighbor mistakenly end up in his mailbox. And so he started getting hassles from collectors because they didn't understand that there were two Johnsons in the same block. And so my grandpa then changed his name to Vod.
Okay.
To avoid being hassled by bill collectors.
Okay. That's good. So you were born in Chicago. Uh, so where did life take you after that?
Well, Dad was lucky because he got one of the last jobs with telephone company before the Depression, and so he was able to sign on to AT&T, and then because the AT&T back then was kind of like military, you were reassigned every 3 years to a different location. So from Chicago, I think we went to Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and then we went to Minneapolis, and then actually also to St. Paul, Minnesota, and then to Kansas City.
Okay.
And so there were a lot of moves. And eventually, because I insisted, his last move was to California.
Okay.
And because I had been assigned to the Presidio at Letterman Hospital in San Francisco, I fell in love with the Bay Area. And before they shipped me off, the Army shipped me off to Germany, I said, Dad, I know there's one more move coming in your career. You got to make it to San Francisco, somewhere in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And I said, you do it. I don't know what it'll take, but you've got to get your butt out here.
Yeah.
And so he did. Actually, they moved him while I was in Germany, but he got the reassignment.
Okay. So I guess let's get to the point where you had a little brother. So you're 6 years older than my father,
Yeah,
correct?
correct.
All right, and that's for the cameras. For the record, that's James Paul Knez.
James Paul Knez.
Okay. Where were you living when he was born?
Minneapolis,
You were in Minneapolis.
because he was born in Minneapolis.
Okay. You know what? I knew that. I had forgotten it though.
Yeah,
For some reason, I thought he
yeah.
was in Omaha.
Yeah, no, no,
No.
no, no. He made it. He he was a baby that I hardly even remember. I mean,
Okay.
I was 6 years old. What 6 year old?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But uh, I do remember that at some point we would be moving to a new house, and I wanted my own room, and so that was one of my priorities. I had to have my own room because I didn't want to sleep with a kid that was crying or fussing.
Yeah.
And for the rest of our young lives, we never shared a room together.
Yeah.
And I hardly ever remember Jim because of that. I mean, I was really involved in grade school, high school activities, and I was president of this and president of that, and I was always late for dinner. We never had family dinners. My mom would make a dinner and then put it in the refrigerator so that I could eat it when I got home at some late hour.
Yeah.
And I never, honest to God, I barely remember my brother. And that's not a knock on him. It was just that our lives are so different.
Yeah.
He came into focus for me when I finally gave him my Chevy 49 convertible because I was getting married and my wife had a car and we couldn't afford two cars. So I gave my brother my beloved Chevy convertible. It was a cherry maroon metallic paint job with a white top, white walls. Oh, it was a babe magnet.
Okay.
But I no longer could be have drive around in a babe magnet because
Yeah,
I'd
you
gotten
married,
married.
got married. Okay. So you had so I'm going to bring it back just a little bit. So you had mentioned grade school and high school and middle school, I'm sure
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
There wasn't middle schools back in
It
those
was just
days.
grade school and high school.
We went from grade, yeah.
Okay. So I know you said you moved around a bit, but like what schools did you go to? Do you remember
What
uh, you
I
know,
honestly don't remember my first kindergarten, first and second grades. They were in Minneapolis. I honestly don't remember. When we got, when Dad got transferred to Chicago, we lived in a suburb called Lake Bluff, which was just a charming little town, a bedroom community. And the local school, grade school, was just wonderful. So I remember starting third grade at Lake Bluff at the public school, which was a really nice experience. I mean, I remember so many things about those days. Even I remember the time we got caught for breaking in one summer to play basketball on the gym court.
yeah.
And that was one of the lessons in life that my folks taught, used as a teaching example. But after grade school, Lake Bluff, we all went to Lake Forest High School, which was about 4 or 5 miles away south.
Okay.
And it was an extraordinary high school, 400 kids total. It was like a private academy. It looked like a mansion. And when I took Joanne there for a class reunion, she couldn't believe it. It had like 5 acres of lawn in the front, and it was set on a knoll, like a Georgian mansion,
Yeah.
and it was extraordinary. We had the best facilities in the Chicagoland area because the tax base was based on people living in Lake Forest, and they were all mega rich. Marshall Fields, Armour,
Hmm.
all these people who were big wheeler and dealers sent their kids to private school in Switzerland.
Yeah.
But the tax money went to making this school, this high school, extraordinary. So we were living good.
Yeah, it was growing up outside Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, we went to Lake Forest. We had some people we knew in Lake Forest, and you knew every time you went to Lake Forest, you knew you went to Lake Forest. Like
Yes.
it is a, even to this day, it is a wealthy community.
Wealthy, wealthy community.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
one of the premier in
yeah,
Chicago.
yeah.
Uh, okay, so you high school in Chicago, and so you mentioned you went to the army, but did you go to the army first, or did you
No,
go to
no.
college
What
first?
happened is that while, as in the senior year, they have a career day and they bring in all kinds of professional people so we can kind of start thinking about what we would like to major in college. I hit it off with a dentist that was there, and I thought, wow, he's cool. And I kind of liked that. I thought about maybe going into medicine or theater because I was really involved in theater at both grade school and high school. And but this guy had a certain magnetism about him, and so he even invited me to come to his office in Lake Forest. And my own dentist in Lake Bluff, Dr. Slater, who was a character, kind of amused me. And I thought, well, these two guys really are good representations of something I could do. So I used to go to both their offices and watch them, and I kind of liked it because it appealed to me in the sense that it was almost there could be artistry involved, and I have an artistic bent, and I saw possibilities of doing artistic dentistry. So what I did is I was accepted at Northwestern University,
Okay.
which had a dental school with it. And I figured, well, might make it easier for me to get into dental school. So it wasn't that easy to get into dental school. So I started my first semester at Northwestern, but my dad got a notice that he was being transferred to Kansas City. And of course, along with that meant, well, would I have to then be boarding or join a fraternity? Or I could, because I obviously couldn't commit. I had planned on living at home because Northwestern was maybe 30 miles from where we lived. And I figured I could commute every day. But we pulled up, moved to Kansas City, and we decided because my dad did some research and he says, well, the University of Kansas City has a dental school. Meanwhile, mom in the background is saying, we want him to go to Notre Dame, John, because my mom was into saving my soul. And there's a whole story around that, which if you want, I'll get into. But I checked out of Northwestern and I checked into the University of Kansas City, which is an urban school, but it had multiple disciplines. It had a law school, it had a dental school, didn't have a medical school, but it had an educational school. I mean, school of education. So it was a well established and respected school. And I thought, okay, it'll work there too. I'll do liberal arts and then I'll go and hopefully have an in to get into dental school. So that's where I ended up.
Okay. All right. So before I circle back to the grandma save your soul thing, uh, so then when did you join the army?
I graduated in 1962, and there was a program. I've forgotten how I knew about it. Maybe I found out about it. The military offers 14 internships to graduating seniors, and that means that for 1 year they'll send you to like Walter Reed or Fitzsimmons or to the Presidio, and they're affiliated then with a dental school, and you get a 1 year post grad education on the Army. They pay for it. You in return give them 2 years of military service. I thought that's a damn good deal. I get an extra year of postgraduate work while I'm stationed at the hospital. I commute to the UC, San Francisco, to their dental school, and I take advanced courses. So I signed up to take the test. Now, this is a nationwide test. They pick only 40 people. I was one of the 40.
Nice.
I was blown away. So, what happened though was that because I was one of these select 40, the Air Force comes in and says, we want you to go Air Force. I said, and I thought, oh God, yes. I mean, somebody wants me. So
Yeah.
I signed. About a week later, the Army calls. Said, we want you going Army. I said, I can't. I've already signed with the Air Force. And they said, well, son, if you go with the Air Force, you're going to go down to Texas. And if you come with us, you're going to go to San Francisco. So I go home and I tell Lynn, my first wife, guess what? I got an offer with the Army to go to San Francisco. And she said, well, great, because if you go to Texas, you're going alone. And if you go to San Francisco, I'll come with you. So I had to go back to the dean of the school, who happened to know both the generals of both Army and Air Force Dental Corps. And I said, Dean, I'm in a jam. I've been accepted by both services for this program, but my wife will only go to San Francisco if I go Army, and I've already signed up with the Air Force. He got on the phone. We had a conference call, Kansas City to Washington D.C. Got two generals, the dean of the school, and little old me sitting there, and they worked it out, and I ended up being released from the Air Force and being able to go to
And
San
just out of
Francisco.
curiosity, on this conference call, how old were you?
I was probably 21
You're 21-year-old on the phone with the dean of a university
and
and two generals
two generals.
of the Air Force and the
Yeah,
Army. That
yeah.
is great.
Fortunately, because I was a somebody that stuck, I think, in some of their minds. The general of the Army Dental Corps was named General Benier. He was quite well known in dental circles because he was a well known pathologist. He had been a dean of the Ohio State Dental School. Well, when I finally got sent, well, first of all, when after this opportunity to go to San Francisco, then I was there for 1 year. Benier would come out to San Francisco to give lectures, and I was the one who would pick him up at the airport. And so I actually got to know a general in the Army almost on a personal basis. And Bernier had this ability. He could never forgot a name. He he was amazing. And even 6 years later, when he would come to Germany to, check out things, he'd remember me. He called me by my name. I was just blown away by that. And that's why he was probably a general.
Okay. So I'm going to pivot back just a little bit here, only because I'm trying to do kind of a timeline, and then
Yeah,
we'll go
you're
free.
running.
And no, a timeline of your life,
Oh,
and then we'll go free form
okay.
later. But I want to circle back to Lynn, your first wife.
Yeah.
Okay, so when did you meet her? What is her name? When did you meet her? When did you get married?
Well, Lynn was
let's
an
explore
Irish.
that.
She was an Irish lass that lived in Kansas City, and her last her last name was Ritchie, so her name was Lynn Ritchie. I met her on the campus of Kansas City, University of Kansas City, when I was still in undergraduate. I had become the president of my fraternity during that time, and we were always, fraternities always have social events. And I met Lynn because one of my fraternity brothers was dating her at the time, and she was cute. And I thought, well, I'm president of this fraternity. I'm going to pull some rank. So, so I said to my fraternity brother, hey, what's that chick's phone number you're talking to? And he said, well, I said, are you seriously going with her? He said, no, we're dating. I said, okay, I want her phone number for sure. So I got her phone number and I called her up, and we went out. And she was, at that time in my life, the only thing that mattered is was she cute?
Yeah.
So we hit it off and we started dating. And she turned out to be um, more of a hormonal attraction than a, a lifetime attraction, sadly, because we had a good time. I mean, she was with me when I went to Germany. She had one child already from a previous marriage in high school. That was Bob. And then we had Kim, and then we had Chris in Germany. So, and we adopted Cosima later because our marriage was basically failing, and we thought, well, I'll try anything. So, but which turned out to be a gift to have Cosima.
Yeah.
But but it was mainly because I met her on campus and she was a hottie and I liked that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, that's
yeah.
okay. God, what was my next question gonna be? I've lost it. All right, so let's circle back to my grandma, your mother, trying to save your soul.
Yeah.
So, you said you had a good story about
It
that.
was a very good story. It starts with the fact that mom grew up in a rigid Presbyterian family, and Grandpa Vod was a Bible toter, and he was stern and severe. And when mom started dating dad, back after he had just finished his studies at University of Nebraska, he found out he was Catholic.
Oh,
He threatened to shoot my dad if he ever caught him on the property. And so there was immediately this tension. And and at that time, Grandpa Val had a large dairy. I mean, he had acreage. He was a dairyman, and he had he was a no nonsense guy, and he would have done it. I'm sure if he had found Dad on anywhere on his property, he would have shot him. So fortunately, Grandma Vod was Mom's sort of advocate, and she'd cover for Mom as when and so Dad would never go on the property, but Mom would slip out her bedroom window and meet Dad,
yeah,
and that was the beginning of their romance under quite a bit of duress.
yeah.
Well, for my mom to marry my dad, she had to join the Catholic Church. Back in those days, it was a requirement, and that would have. I'm sure my grandpa would have gone out and shot both of them because he was that rigid.
Yeah.
So, mom grew up with a sense of fierceness about her around religion, which then translated, I came to realize why she was so determined that I remain Catholic, because she believed she was responsible for my soul. She had been lobbying Dad to send me either to Notre Dame, or, in fact, there was a Jesuit college near the University of Kansas City, and she wanted me to go there because it was a religious Catholic college. And I kept saying no, because I have a better chance of getting into dental school if I stay at and get my undergraduate, at the University of Kansas City. So Dad was on my side, fortunately, but Mom, I had to hear about it all the time. In fact, I lived at home during my undergraduate years, and one time, and I took a comparative religion class. I made the mistake of taking a repair. And one time I came home and my textbook, she'd gone through my textbook, and anything that referred to the Catholic Church that was at least a bit negative, she ripped the pages. She ripped the pages out of my book. She was censoring, basically. And I really got pissed. I was really upset. And I think that's why today I'm very liberal. I'm a liberal Democrat because I don't believe anybody has any business telling you what to do.
Yeah.
You know, and so that created a bit of a rift between Mom and myself for quite a few years. I still love my mom and respected her, but I was very upset with her. Finally got resolved after Dad died, because then I became her probably best friend,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I take her everywhere, and she loosened up by that time, and it all turned out fine. But
Okay.
that was a tough time. That was a very important moment for me,
Yeah.
because it also determined where I was kind of going with my political mentality.
Yeah, yeah, it had more ramifications
More ramifications. Yeah.
than I think she would have
Yeah.
anticipated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so I want to come back to the Army because this is, I know you said you spent 6 years in the Army.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about your journey through the Army? I know you spent a lot of time in Germany,
Yeah.
but from the time going into the Army to your time leaving the Army, can you give me like a timeline, like what year you went
Yeah.
in, what year you went out, and kind of your journey through there?
I finished the program at Letterman in 1963 because remember I had graduated in 1962 from dental school. I went in as a second lieutenant, spent the year at Letterman in this graduate program, got a promoted to first Louis, and then because I was sort of a golden boy, I had my choice of where I could be assigned. You normally don't get that choice.
Okay.
And I said, I want to go to Germany. I want to go to Europe. I want to live in Europe, preferably Germany.
And so I think let's just take that into context for maybe future people who may need a little bit of context. World War II in Europe ended in 1942,
Five
1945, and this is 63. So you're talking 18 years after
after
World War II. Europe is still, for the most part,
shattered,
shattered and rebuilding.
rebuilding.
I mean, not just the buildings, but even culturally.
Oh no! And the
And
Berlin Wall was up at that time.
yeah, yeah, the Russians had
Yeah,
secured most of
yeah,
Eastern Germany,
yeah.
and so now that context now aside, so now you go to be stationed in Germany.
So my first wife, Lynn, had a fear of flying, a real phobia. So because I had this sort of golden boy slot, I got to go over on a ship. Normally they just fly over and
Yeah,
dump you in Frankfurt. Well, I got assigned to a troop ship. What I didn't realize, it wasn't a luxury. I mean, it had been a luxury liner, but it had been recommissioned. Vietnam was starting up. So they were starting to pull ships and refitting them for military use. So, but we had a nice cabin. We lived a pretty nice life for 5 6 days going across. And what I didn't realize is that as a military officer, I had a duty. I kind of thought I was on a cruise. No, I was I was officer of the day the last day we were out at sea, which meant that I had all the papers and all the documents to transfer all these troops to the the German training system.
so all the paperwork.
So what did but I didn't know I didn't understand that. So as soon as we docked, I was supposed to report to somebody and get all the paperwork and then be the official person to get everybody loaded on the trains. What did I do? As soon as the gangplank went down, I grabbed my camera and I took off into town so I could sightsee. They could not leave the train station without me signing off. I was walking around town looking at all the sites, and suddenly some MPs come up, and it's kind of like they grab me. I said, "What am I? What the hell? Get your hands off me!" They said, "Cat." But and yeah, now I was a first lieutenant, and they said, "Lieutenant, what are you doing? You're supposed to be back on the dock, getting the troops loaded on to the train." I said, "What?" So they throw me in the jeep. They take me back to the dock. The whole Bundeswehr train system is shut down because this is an express train. It had military priority, and nobody could go anywhere until that train got going. Fucked up the whole system because I wanted to take some
Yeah, you
pictures.
wanted to take some pictures.
So we get on, and when they finally get back, they shackle this briefcase to me and assign two MPs, and they stand be on either side of me, and and they're watching me the whole time as we're going down to Stuttgart. Yeah, yeah, that was my first miscue with the army. You
Okay.
know, but we got there, and eventually, I guess the German rail system recovered and got back on, because that's number one priority. You're on time
Yeah.
if you're on a train in Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from there, I was assigned to a medical dental clinic at Patch Barracks, which is just outside of Stuttgart. It was in a little village called Stuttgart Wahingen. And it used to be Rommel's tank concern. And they had tunnels running from that army post all the way to the train station, the Bahnhof in Stuttgart. Now, that was probably 15 miles. But that's how Rommel got all of his tanks to go without being bombed, underground. So I was the head of the clinic. I was just there as about five or six other guys. One of them was a famous basketball player from North Carolina who played against Wilt Chamberlain and won the NCAA, trophy. He won the game actually on a free throw.
Oh.
Yeah. And then one of the other guys was a child piano protege who I still am in contact with in North Dakota, and he and his wife were exceptional musicians, and they got to play all these wonderful organs and claviers that Mozart had been playing on and Beethoven had playing on. Because they were respected musicians. Yeah. So there was an interesting group that I practiced dentistry with. And one of my enduring friends that now lives in Arizona, I had to pull a wisdom. I had never met the guy before, but he became a patient. And I was pulling a wisdom tooth the day the lights went out in the clinic, and he still talks about the time that he had just me trying to pull a wisdom tooth by flashlight, which is not easy, by the way.
Okay.
But he stayed friends with me. We became good friends. So these army connections still are part of my life. So I was there. I practiced dentistry. I was sort of given all of the officers because I was this golden boy from this program. And so I I kept I did my normal time, and then I told one general, I said, "Hey, I really like it here. Do you think you could give me an extension?" So I was able to get a little more time there in Germany. The problem was, though, the counter of that was that Lynn, because we had these kids, was always parking in the general's parking slot because the daycare center was in the same building as headquarters. And she'd always see this open spot, and she'd always pull in there just about the time the general would come by, and his driver couldn't park in their spot. And I got into some trouble about that because they can't do anything to your wife, but they sure can do it to you.
Yeah.
And then one of the other things that created problems for me is I thought the army uniform was really drab, and at Christmas time I used to put a red vest under my official army uniform. And one day, some officer, field officer, saw me walking around. He saw this red vest, and boy, he said, "Do you know what you're doing? You are violating the dress code for the U.S. Army, soldier." So I had to take my vest off. I got written up. But prior to that, when I was at the Presidio, I was one day in what they call the commissary or PX, and I had this would have been Kim on my back in a Gary carrier, one of these kitty packs.
Mhm.
But I was in uniform, and I was with Lynn, and we were shopping, And somebody in civies comes up to me and said, "Soldier, you are a disgrace to the U.S. Army." And I thought, "Who are you?" Said, "You should be court-martialed for what you're doing." And I said, "What am I doing?" He said, "You got this baby on your back. And do you know that that kid is thrown up on your epaulets?" And I looked over and the kid, of course, Jim had barfed. And I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" I said, "I got this kid. It's none of your business anyway. So bug off." And I walked away. That was the general of the Presidio, Fifth Army. But he couldn't do anything because he was in civies. The next day at the hospital at Letterman, we got a command order for assembly. Everybody in the hospital had to come to this conference room. And who was up there with all the medals and the brass? The guy that I told to bug off. And he was livid. He was just crimson. He said, "Come up here." I didn't come up. I just went. I did deep six, and they was waiting and waiting, and he said, "All right, I get it." He said, "But I'm going to find out." Well, he never did.
You never found out who you were?
Never found out
Okay.
who I was. So, man, I dodged a big one on that. See, as much as I loved the military, I wasn't cut out for it. I mean, I actually was in line to become a major. That's pretty automatic. But I didn't take it because I didn't want to obligate myself to maybe not getting out, and I wanted out. So in the end, I got released, but it wasn't easy because I kept getting these extensions because I had some pull. But the transportation department finally got so exasperated. They said, "Knez," and I was trying to get a surface travel home, but at that time it would have been on like the Queen Mary. It would have been really nice, but I didn't have the rank. And they finally said, "Knez, if you don't get on the next airplane out of here, you're going to swim home."
Yeah.
So Lynn was still phobic about flying. So they had to, I said, "Well, look at my wife is phobic." So she had to go see the psychiatrist. He did validate it. So they pumped her full of drugs. And I had a rag doll that I had to deal with. I mean, she didn't know where she was, what time of day it was, and she was totally blitzed. So I had the kids and her to deal with. But we got home, and when we landed, she was still out of it. So I drag her out to the front of the airport sidewalk with the luggage and the kids, and finally find some guy who'll stop. But we all looked like, it was so funny because we were still kind of dressed like Germans. We had
Later hosen.
later hosen as the kids, and I had a loading jacket on, and so I finally get somebody to stop, and the guy gets out, and he said, "You guys speak English?" I said, "Yeah."
Yeah.
He said, "Well, you look like you're Krauts." And I said, "No, I'm a ex-service guy." He said, "All right." So I piled Lynn in and the kids and the luggage, and we get to the BOQ. The first week I was in Germany, and had gotten in this little house up on the hill looking down into the valley. It was like idyllic. There was a castle on the far distant ridge, and this little town was picturesque with a church steeple and red roofs. I went down to see, they were having a little fest, a little village party, and there was this big German cooking bratwurst on an open grill. And I mean, he was huge, big guy, and he had this big leather apron on. And I'm trying to practice my German and say, Entschuldigen, bitte, haben Sie Wurst? And he stops for a moment. And he turns around, and he's fearsome looking guy. And he says, "Yeah, Mac, what do you want, a weenie?" And I said, "You know English?" He said, "Yeah, I was a prisoner of war in Brooklyn for 4 years." And, so I had a lot of moments of memorable moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that.
So there was, I wanted to ask you about this because I've kind of vaguely heard this story. I don't know how true it is, and I don't know if maybe it's over the years it has been. But my father came to visit you in Europe, and I'm not sure if your military paths did they cross at all, because he was in the Navy at some
He
point.
wasn't yet. He might have. He was. I think the trip that I thinking of was right before he went into the Navy, or maybe he just
Okay,
become.
because there's a story about you guys transporting books into Berlin, and were you part of that?
Yeah,
And then leaving Berlin, you had some mechanical trouble, which
yeah,
may have been caused by an intelligence service.
yeah. What the deal was that Lynn's had a cousin who had graduated from Brown University and majored in German studies. And she was doing an extra year Fulbright scholarship at, at the Dahlem University in West Berlin. So we wanted to go visit her. And so, as a military person, you had to go on a autobahn that was designated just for the military, and you could go through East Germany to West Berlin.
Okay, and just a little bit of context here. The Soviets had controlled East Germany, and the Allies, basically U.S., UK, France, controlled West Germany. But Berlin is in the middle of East Germany,
And it was
and
split.
it was the city was split in between the East and the West. So there was one highway that military could take
Yeah,
from the border of West
going
Germany
into
into Berlin itself.
Berlin.
Yes.
And that went into the American sector because it was um, the Russians, the Americans, and I think it was a joint Brit French segment.
Okay.
So so we go there and we visit her. I've forgotten her name now, and she said one day she said, "Can you do me a favor?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I've got some English books that I've connected with a priest in East Berlin, and he really liked to be able to have these books." I said, "Oh, that's no big deal. My van has curtains. They can't stop me at Checkpoint Charlie because I got these U.S. military plates. I'll pull the curtains. We'll load the books in under the cushions in the van. I'd built this. That's another story. I'd built in this camper into this Volkswagen, and we'll just go over, and they can't stop me. So that's what we do. We load up the Volkswagen with all these books that are banned. They'll drive through Checkpoint Charlie, go to the priest's residence, which is behind the church,
Hmm.
pull up to the back door, and proceed to unload all these books. And thought nothing of it. Get back in. I go park on Leningrad Strasse, go do a little sightseeing, get back, and I guess your brother was with me. I can't remember. And we start to, you know, backtrack through Checkpoint Charlie, stop at the hotel, get all our gear, and head back to West Germany. Well, somewhere not too far out of Berlin, and starting to go up this grade, and of course back then I was driving the air-cooled Volkswagen engine, and you probably couldn't go more than 15 miles an hour, if that, if you were going up a grade. And what the hell happens? The back wheels on my van fall off. And I'm thinking, what? Well, the what was the Nastasi were watching me the whole time, and they saw what I had done, and they sabotaged the van while it was parked. And so we were just damn lucky that we were going up, and I wasn't probably going more than 12 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately, that corridor is controlled by U.S. military, and so military police come by at one point, not too long after this happened, and they see. I said, my wheels fell off my car, and they said, "You were sabotaged, buddy. Come on."
Yeah.
So they arranged to have a tow truck come, and I found the wheels, and they had lug nuts, and they put the
wheels back
back
on,
on,
and you're able to.
and the muffler was all shot,
Yeah.
and but I went on my way. You cannot get off that Autobahn the minute you take an exit. If it's not a designated exit, like to a gas station, there was Nastasi waiting for you
And
to arrest you.
Nastasi were the
Secret police.
was that the German secret police or the
Yeah, they were German, East German
East German secret
secret
police?
police.
So it wasn't like the KGB.
No,
No.
no,
Okay.
no.
Okay. So all right. So uh, when did when you left with Germany? Is that when you left the military?
Yeah, yeah. I had put in, I think a total of 6 years. I was ready to get out, and while uh, I had one of those 6 years, I'd lived in Mill Valley doing this intern program, so I knew I wanted to come back to California. And fortunately, while I was at Letterman, I took the California board, because you cannot practice in any state without taking their board.
Okay.
And I passed it the first time. Guys try 5, 6 times sometimes, but I was able to pass it. And so I had that in my back pocket. And I had lived in Mill Valley for that 1 year in an apartment. So I knew Mill Valley. I knew I liked it. I wanted to open a practice there. So while I was in Germany, my dad started looking for maybe office space for me. Well, it's not easy, because the dentist has to have a lot of plumbing and special electrical hookups. Yep. And he finally found a little office right in the center of town, above the Old Mill Tavern. Well, on the way home from being mustered out, one of my buddies, the Nyberg guy I talked about, who was a child prodigy pianist, his dad had found him a practice. He had also gone to dental school in probably Minnesota, and his dad had found him an office, and it was above a tavern in the town of Yankton. Well, Yankton is near an Indian reservation, and when I pulled into Yankton on the way back to California, and he took me to his office, there were all these drunk Indians on the steps, because when they get their paycheck, they'd go get totally drunk, and then they'd sleep it off on the steps up to his office, because he was above the bar. So I vowed I was never going to open a practice above a bar on the second floor. When I get home, and my dad's so happy, he said, "I found you an office." He said, "Come on, I'm going to show it to you." And sure enough, it's above a bar. I said, "Gee, thanks, Dad." But as it turned out, there weren't any, there were hippies, but there weren't any Indians.
Hippies use side doors. Yeah, yeah, I know that sign quite
Yeah.
well.
But it turned out that eventually one of my patients, a realtor, he saw a building that I had coveted even back when I was there in '62 in Mill Valley, that I thought would really be a neat building to practice in. It was all Victorian. Happened that that building came on the market because it was condemned and it was going to be torn down.
Okay.
Well, my patient, being a realtor, he said, "Tell you what." I said, "I don't have money for this." He said, "I'll buy it, and then we'll work out the financing so that you can pay me back." And that's how I end up with this wonderful old Victorian building that was my office until I retired.
Okay. So I do want to like the dental part of your is a major part of your life,
Yeah.
and I do want to come back and talk about that
Okay.
extensively. But I'm going to circle back a little bit
Okay.
because we have mentioned your children,
Yes.
but I feel like before we get too much further into your life, we should really talk about them.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I think so. They
yeah, yeah, I think that that's probably a
major part of my life.
yeah, yeah. So you meet Lynn because she's hot,
Yeah.
and you get married. She has
She
Bob.
she has Bob.
How old is Bob when you guys get married?
Bob, I think, was probably around 3, and I got a clue as to what kind of kid he was the first time I went to pick Lynn up, because she was living with her folks at that time. So was Bob, and her parents doted on him. He was like just a gift to them. Well, I parked my red hot convertible that I had Jim finally got on the street, and they're kind of on a hill. And I get out of the car, and I'm noticing there's this kid with a plastic yellow baseball bat, and he's whacking this chicken in the front yard, and the chicken is nipping at him. You know, he'd whack him, and the chicken would jump at him, and these two were having this confrontation. Well, I'm so enthralled that I forget to put the parking brake on my car. And the next thing I know, because there was all this commotion, and Lynn apparently comes to the front door and she sees my car rolling down the hill. I have to turn around and run after my car. Fortunately, it had not gotten up to full steam. I jumped over the car, over the door, and grabbed the parking brake, which at that time was, one you could pull up, and stop the car. Otherwise, I don't know where would it ended up, and it'd been probably trash.
Yeah.
But that was my first few moments on my first date. And Bob turns out to be brilliant. He's a very smart guy. And unfortunately, I didn't really understand how to parent, you know. And all I could think of was I had this hot wife, you know, and Bob was kind of incidental, and I didn't know what to do as a parent because he would follow me around, and he was so smart and so inquisitive. So I raised Bob kind of like, oh, what do you want, kid?
Yeah.
And I feel so bad about that. And then Kimberly comes along, and I got a little more of a clue what
Yeah.
it's like to be a father. I had tried to actually um, I had taken some hypnosis classes when I was in Nell school, and we actually kind of had Kim through hypnosis, which meant I had to work with Lynn, and yet the obstetrician, he was uncomfortable with that, so I didn't really get to do the total hypnosis birth thing. but
Okay.
but that began my connection. I had more of a connection,
Hmm.
and so there was Kim born. And it's so funny because she was, when I left dental school, we put her in one of these little baby bassinet things, and I bought this Peugeot. Up to that time, I'd given my car to Jim. Lynn was driving a little Renault Dauphine, one of these. Well, look who's here. My daughter, Kim.
Yeah, we were just talking about you.
Come join.
So,
Say hi to Mike.
so I did want to ask you, so we're talking about
We're talking about you right now.
Oh, really?
When is Bob's birthday?
Bob's birthday
When
is
was he born?
7th of January. What year?
He's 5 years younger than me. I was 62, so he would
Okay.
have been 57.
57.
57. Okay, now
Yeah.
when's your birthday?
January 14th, 1962.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay.
Oh, God,
So,
a long time ago.
Yeah. We drive. So I say I can't drive from Kansas City to San Francisco in this tinny little Dauphine. So on a rainy night, I take it down to a used car lot, and the salesman says, I said, hey, I just graduated. I don't have a lot of money. What have you got that'll get me to California? And he said, well, listen, he said, we got this funny French car called a Peugeot. And he said, it's almost brand new. I said, well, why you got it? She said, well, the lady that bought it just had a knee operation and it's a manual shift and she can't push the clutch pedal. I said, okay, I'll trade you this Dauphine, which was more popular than a Peugeot. And so I drive. We work a deal, and for $900, I get this car. Well, the front seats go down to make a bed. So we drove Kim with a baby in a baby basket, which I strung on the ceiling. Bob would sleep under the steering wheel, and Lynn and I would sleep on the reclined front seats across the country to San Francisco. So that's how we arrived. See?
Oh, okay.
So that's Kim's early years. Then, while I'm in Germany, Christopher is born.
Okay.
He's born at Bad Cannstatt Hospital near Stuttgart. And hey, Dave, and he's got dual citizenship
Okay.
because of that.
So, what's his birthday?
His birthday is November 11th, Veterans Day. That would have been 19. Let's see, that had been 64,
Okay.
1964. And then, because I mentioned, things had started to unravel, and eventually it was destined to go separate directions. In an effort to save the marriage, I made an arrangement with a local physician that was occupying the office in the building that I had just restored, and we shared a waiting room. We were able to actually adopt Casima kind of out under the radar off the grid, which turned out to be one of the most beautiful things that's ever happened.
So, how old was Casima when you adopted her?
She was about 12 hours old.
Okay. And oh wow. And so, what day was that?
Oh,
When is her birthday?
hey, Kim, when's Casima's birthday?
Christina is October
11th, October 11th.
And she's 12 years younger than me, so
She
10 would be
83?
72, 74, 1974.
74.
Yeah.
74. Okay.
So, fun fact: Casima, on both sides of my family, Casima is my closest cousin in age.
Yeah.
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 So-
Because now Casima's what, 51? How old are you?
47.
52, she's 50.
She's 50. I think, yeah. She's either 50 or 51. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the children. We finally after all this time, we finally got to your kids. Kind of important.
And they are wonderful. And they are,
He's not saying that because you're standing there.
No.
you know, like-
they are such the such a focus in my life now.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I fortunately we're close enough. We all live within a radius of like 35 miles that I'm doing things with them all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the dental thing.
Okay,
So, because I know that
that's major
that's
too.
major as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
So, now you've got this building.
yeah.
You've got this Victorian building. How long did it take you to get your dental operation up and running, or was there, was it pretty much successful from the get-go?
It was it wasn't easy because I was practicing in a small village, Mill Valley. There are already established dentists, but the dentists that were there were good to me. They funneled extra patients to me, and actually the office that my dad found for me had been a dental office, and he had just moved one block up and built his own office. So there was a hippie poet occupying the space when he was able to rent it or get the rental, because the people that owned the building, they wanted somebody of more standing than this hippie drugged out poet.
Yeah.
You know, so but he was quite well known, and uh, but I met him, and so I thought, how can I make a dental office out of this? So with my dad's help, we ran PVC plumbing lines and all that, and got it up to speed, which ultimately became a real problem because one night the plumbing broke and it emptied all the water onto the new pool table in the rehabilitated fern bar that Shirley and Pete Balcom had just spent thousands of dollars remodeling. So
Yeah.
that was a crisis, which I got past. So I was there for maybe a year and a half, and that's when this patient of mine told me about the building about 3 blocks down on Miller, 239 Miller. And he bought it, and I had at that point then taken on a partner who had just graduated from Stanford Law School, and he was looking for a place to open an office. So his grandfather was very wealthy in Southern California, lived in LA somewhere. So he funded the money for us to remodel this old Victorian. And out of that, we were able to pay back John Peterson, the realtor, and complete the renovation of this 1896 building. And it went all okay until I ended up getting, during the remodeling, Legionnaire's disease. And my practice was in the toilet. And I couldn't even soup. I was in the hospital and weak, and for 6 months I was barely able to move. I was so sick. So my partner then took over, but then he got PO'd because he was doing all the work, and we had this 50-50. So he came to me one day after I was kind of back on my feet, and he said, I want 100% of this building. I said, no, I bought the building. I invited you in, and I'm sorry I got sick, but that was just, hey, it's like a marriage.
Yeah.
And he sues me, and we go to court, and I have to eventually, and we sell we have to sell the building. So
Ah.
I lost that building, but the guy that bought it wanted me there because, and Dyer said, if I get this building, you're out. So I thought, shoot, I mean, I'm not going to have a livelihood.
Yeah.
So I fought tooth and nail, and I advertised in the New York Times. And I got a contact with a guy that was a Lebanese. He was an American, but he claimed he was with the Lebanese consulate. He was the shadiest guy. I got him to outbid Dyer. and he knocked Dyer out of the bidding and ended up buying the building. Well, I had to pay him 10% of the final cost, and then someone else bought the building, and all he did was just keep bidding, and this other guy kept bidding until he knew Dyer was out. Then he stopped, and this guy owned the building.
Yeah.
Well, it happened to be that he was Dianne Feinstein's manager, political manager for her San Francisco time.
Okay.
So he had a lot of connections and he had money. So I end up having him as a landlord, and he was a pain in the ass. But he at least let me stay in my office, which Dad and I had built and plumbed, and man, I put a lot of money into my office space. See, so that is where I ended up practicing for 25 years until I retired in 2000. Sold my practice, continued to work, to help her get on her feet. And I worked for some other dentists, and then moved eventually to Santa Rosa.
Okay. Very cool. All right. So that kind of covers that's a very brief overview of your dental profession, which encompasses a good portion of your life,
Yeah.
from high school all the way, that you wanted to be a dentist to.
Yeah.
But you were able to, seems like, from my perspective, you were able to make a good living,
Yeah.
raise a family,
Yeah. It was a lot.
successfully raise a family,
Yeah.
and it seems like a very successful career.
And it was interesting career because I had a lot. I mean, I had Neil Young as patients. I had the Grateful Dead as patients.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I had Metallica. I had Lars from Metallica as a patient.
Okay.
I mean, I had a lot of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Daddy.
Hi. Oh. Nice to see you. Thank you. Well,
Michael.
Hello.
unfortunately, Bob is on vacation,
Yes.
so he won't be here.
Remember these times? Do you remember Grandma's garlic bread?
Yes.
Okay.
We still make that.
You're about to.
Yeah.
Oh, no. You don't.
No.
I still make it.
Oh, no.
Okay,
No.
just saying.
I have the recipe.
Hey.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So does Dad.
Okay.
No.
No.
It's in that tradition.
It's a fight.
Yes.
Happy Father's Day, Dad.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was just saying to
Uh,
Mike how I remember you windsurfing out here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of family time here.
Yeah. Okay, so that's actually a great transition point because you are an outdoor person,
Yes, he is.
and so let's talk about like how you got into the outdoor life, if you will. Like, much like my father is, Captain Planet a little bit.
Yeah.
Who was went to college for trees. You like hiking, backpacking, camping. So
Skiing.
skiing. Is that something you guys were raised with?
Yeah, our dad was a fisherman, and every year we would go to Canada and spend a month fishing. And that's where I got to love the outdoors, because up there you could see the aurora borealis at night, and you could drink the water out of the lake. It was just unbelievable. And to get there, it was an ordeal. I mean, we really had to put on our adventure hats to get there.
Yeah, because I mean that's a pre-interstate system.
Pre-interstate and gravel roads.
Yeah, and you're talking about even from Chicago to the Canadian border, going through Wisconsin, is during that time it took a long time.
Long time.
It was an effort.
And Dad had this one-wheel trailer that he packed with all the gear, and towed behind at that time like the old Oldsmobile. But he had it so loaded down that the spring would pop off the one wheel,
Yeah.
and we would have to unload everything a number of times, and so he could find the spring and then pop it back in so that we could continue on because there were potholes.
Yeah.
There, I mean, this was not smooth asphalt. This was gravel.
Yeah.
So I had a very early experience with outdoors, which ended up continuing into my own adult life. And I've spent a lot of time with your dad backpacking in Colorado,
Yeah.
skiing in Colorado,
Yeah.
backpacking even in California on my own or with Chris. Bob wasn't into that. He didn't go for that.
Yeah.
But I have been outdoors my whole life.
Okay. So there's one memory that my father likes to bring up about camping with you, and I want to know if you remember this. This is a good one. This is not bad. Um, he always says the most beautiful thing he's ever seen in his life is you two were camping in the Sierra Nevada somewhere, and it got really cold one night, and it was either snowing or raining, or it was raining, and then it got really cold, and you guys had spent a very cold night camping. But when you woke up in the morning, all the water had frozen to the trees, and as the sun was coming up, it was refracting through all the frozen tree branches, and he often says that that's the most beautiful thing he's ever seen in his life. And do you recall that?
I'm going to change it just a little.
Okay, and I may be getting the story wrong.
Yeah. We it was in Isolation Valley, which is just off 50 coming up to the Sierras. We had parked at the trailhead and walked into the interior, and while we were on our route, it snowed heavily, but it was a sudden freak storm, and so it dumped a lot of wet snow on all the pine trees around there. And we decided we better find a place to camp and not try to push on. So we found a little dip and a little hollow with a ridge to the east of us. And then the sun comes out. I mean, this is afternoon. And all of a sudden, all of this wet snow starts to melt. Well, it then turned really cold. It was so freaky. And all of this dripping water froze into icicles. What I remember is that a full moon came up behind the
That's what it
ridge.
is. It's not the sunrise, it's the full moon. Yes.
And it backlit all of these icicles. And then there was a little bit of a breeze. And so all these icicles started to either fall off the trees
Or dance a little bit.
or sway.
Yeah.
And it was an absolute magical moment. It didn't last that long, but that moon just glowed in all of these icicles and these drippings. And it was like a phenomenon that I don't know if anybody has ever experienced it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was memorable. Yeah. Yeah.
So there was obviously that. Are there any other experiences camping outdoors wise, being out in the
Well,
wilderness that you want to tell?
your brother once took me fly fishing buck naked, which I didn't know.
Okay.
No, I mean, in many of the trips that we took, I had one interesting experience. We were going up, I don't know which 14, and I ran into a high school classmate who was with another group sitting at a junction, and I hadn't seen Laurie in what would have been 4, 8, another 5, 13, maybe 20 years. And there he was sitting right where we just converged, and it was startling to
Yeah.
me. Yeah, yeah. So, but we had many wonderful trips, many wonderful trips.
Yeah. So I obviously I have experience through my youth coming out to California. Maybe doing some hikes and some light camping with your family. Even
Yeah,
this park we're at. Uh, I know that there's some memories there somewhere
yeah,
in my childhood
so,
of being at
yeah,
this park.
yeah,
It's ringing
yeah,
some bells, but that was
yeah,
40 years ago.
yeah,
So there's a lot of the outdoor stuff also kind of comes along with, even though you're Midwest born and raised and kind of moved around the Midwest a little bit, you really gravitated towards the Bay Area and Mill Valley.
yeah,
And so it seems to me that, so would you say in your mid 20s, maybe late 20s, is when you moved to California?
yeah. Because I had finished dental school, I was 22.
Yeah.
So,
And so it seems like the Bay Area has been a
oh,
big part of your
big
life.
influence in my life.
And so, can you tell me about the San Francisco of, or the Bay Area of when you moved here in
Well, when
60,
I
69?
the,
Yeah,
yeah, it really the love affair began in '62 after my graduation, driving out here, because I came across the Oakland Bay Bridge on the 4th of July. And as I was going across the bridge, they were shooting all the fireworks off, their annual fireworks display at Chrissy Field on the Presidio. And I thought, wow, this is really pretty neat. I'm being really welcomed with fireworks, like I thought, no. So, so I kind of joke about that because I sign in at the hospital and they send me to a motel in what they call Daly City. I get up the next morning. It was crystal clear that night. I get up the next morning and I look out the window. I can't see a dang thing.
yeah,
It's fogged in, which is what happens in Daly City at that time of year. I mean, put my arm out the front door and my hand disappeared. The fog was so thick.
yeah,
So I thought, what, what is this place? And so I found my way to the hospital, and for the first week, I'd look under the fog bank, and I'd see sunlight, kind of right on the water. I say, God, this weekend I got to go see what's over there. I had no idea what the geography was. So you go across the Golden Gate Bridge, you go through a tunnel with a rainbow on it, and as soon as you go through the tunnel on the other side, paradise, clear blue sky, no fog.
I know that tunnel. Yes, yes,
I thought, wow. And so I didn't know where I was going, but I saw some signs, Mill Valley. So I just go into Mill Valley, and I thought, this is cool. Love this. So that's where I rented for that 1 year. And
yeah,
that's where I decided I was coming back and I would live in Mill Valley. Interesting enough, I was going through an old photo album that my folks, that I have somewhere, and Dad was standing on 101 on what they call Richardson Bridge. They hadn't even paved the 101 yet. It was all gravel, it just been graded. And he's got a picture looking north of what would be on the left Mill Valley, and on the right, which became Mill Valley also. There were no homes there at
yeah,
that. It was 41.
yeah,
Weird, weird. But
yeah.
that's where I settled.
Okay, so you got to watch the San Francisco go through, which could be argued the epicenter of the hippie movement
Oh
in the
yeah,
70s.
yeah,
And that, like you said, you had Bob Weir, who is
yeah,
arguably the main person
yeah.
for the Grateful Dead
Then
as a
yeah,
client,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
must have been very interesting times to watch
Yeah.
to watch the city.
Oh,
Like,
flower children everywhere. I mean, quite frankly, um, uh, it was Hemingway's daughter lived kind of up the hill from us. She had just moved and she'd been there, but the neighborhood we moved into had been like kind of celebrity movement. I was on the golf course. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, what? Wow.
yeah,
And of course everybody was smoking joints, and Chris was building a marijuana garden on my roof, and it, it was, I mean, it was a wild time
yeah,
and interesting time, and there were peace marches, and there was all kinds of stuff going on, and it was culture shock. And I really had to kind of take a deep breath and say, well, I'm not used to this,
yeah.
but I joined a lot of civic groups, and my first experience in Mill Valley was being naked in a hot tub, you know.
Yeah. Okay.
But I thought, okay,
Yeah.
this is the culture, and so I was in a park. I was commissioner, a park and rec commissioner, and involved in the JCs, which ran the Dipsy, which of course Bob became, head of, and now Chris. In fact, he'll be here at some point.
So let's actually that's a good transition as well. Can you so for those who are listening, the Dipsy race. Can you tell us about what that
The
is?
Dipsy race is the second oldest foot race in America behind the Boston Marathon. It's a 7.4-mile cross country race, starts in downtown Mill Valley, goes over Mount Tam, and ends up in Stinson Beach on the coast. It is a very strenuous, challenging race. The racers are limited to 1,500 because it goes through national park land in Muir Woods. So there's always been a big battle about how many people should be allowed to run without damaging the root structures of redwoods and all that. But it is a legendary race, and Kim still runs it. I ran it 15 times. Your brother, your your brother, your
Yeah,
dad,
yeah.
your dad ran it with me at least once, maybe more. And there's a picture of he and I, and I'm after the race, and he looks great, and I look like crap.
Did he still have a mustache at that time? Probably.
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
no, no,
Okay.
yeah. But it's been a family affair because of Bob and Chris's involvement,
Hmm.
and uh, and then Kim and it all started with me. So I'm kind of proud. We have a step. There's a famous set of steps. Hey Kim, how many steps are there in the Dipsy
I
step?
want to say it's like 669 steps.
669 steps. They're infamous because they're absolutely bone crushing. Yeah, they're brutal. But we have a step with a plaque of our family there, so we're really invested in this race.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
good. Something else. So what you did mention you had been involved in other civic uh, organizations.
Yeah.
So obviously the Dipsy race. Uh,
The
what?
park and rec was interesting because there was a restriction that only boys could play little league baseball at the
Mhm.
time, and of course this was a lot of foment in this era. And I was on the commission that made it a rule that girls could play in city parks on baseball teams. And and one of the I still remember the hearing where coaches with the guys are saying, "This is awful. This is lousy. You're going to let girls play baseball," and and I remember one coach saying, "And What about when a girl's going to slide into second base? Where's the baseman going to touch her with make her out? Like if they had boobs? Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
At that age?
Yeah.
So we finally passed the rule that girls could play baseball on Little League and use city parks. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to use city park. And I was very proud of that.
Yeah.
Because there was still a lot of, and even today there's still resistance, you know.
So there's a story I did want to ask about. Um, I've heard that you saved a man from drowning one time. Was that you?
No,
That was somebody else. Okay.
somebody else. Yeah,
Okay. I figured it's somebody else.
yeah.
Um, so when did when did your folks end up moving to California? And let's talk about that a little bit because I want to like then transition up to Santa Rosa.
Oh, okay. So they, as I think I mentioned earlier, I petitioned my folks, my dad, to
Yeah.
get a transfer before he retired to the Bay Area and to San Francisco and Marin County.
Yes.
So I had already left for Germany by the time that happened. But he did do it. And so he helped find me this office.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was in Germany, he found the lot in Santa Rosa here and had the plans drawn up. And when I got back, he was just getting ready to start construction. So I would come up and help him because he was trying to build it partly himself, along with a licensed contractor. So that would have been, so I got that was 60, sometime in 68 they started building, and I think they finished and moved in 69, and they were there, until Dad passed, and then and Mom moved, and that's when the house went on the market. um, I would come up a lot after my divorce, and I got divorced in '85. So I can't remember when Mom came to stay with you guys and live in Rockford.
Okay. So, she, I was an early teen, so it would have been the early '90s.
Yeah,
Because you said your father passed in '85,
yeah,
and I remember Grandma had been in a nursing home out here for a little bit.
yeah, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. I think it probably was 90. I had just taken her to a A's ball game. She was a big A's fan, and I dropped her off at the house, and I was living in Mill Valley, and said goodbye, and she was in good health, and I would call normally every day or every other day, and I'd just seen her, so I didn't call the next day. The next day I did call, and no answer. I thought, well, she's out in the yard or something. And so I tried calling several times that day, and I thought, that's strange. At some point, this was before cell phones. So I called the neighbor across the street, and I said, hey, uh, I'm kind of concerned. My mom's not answering the phone. He says, I haven't seen her out in her garden either. I said, well, would you go over and knock and see what's up? So he went over and no answer. So he had presence of mind right away to call the fire department. And they came out, and Mom had collapsed. She had apparently had a stroke. And they found her halfway in the bedroom and bathroom. So they rushed her to the hospital. I rushed up right away, and the doctor said, she's not going to make it. You better go ahead and make funeral arrangements. So I called everybody in Omaha. I went to the funeral home, which is still on 4th Street, picked out a casket, It was like going to a showroom and looking at cars, you
Yeah.
know. And went back and was going to be by her bedside when she passed. All of a sudden, I think on the third day, and people had all arrived by that time, she wakes up and says, "Where am I?" I said, "Mom, you're in a hospital. You're supposed to be dying." She said, "I want to go home." And so doctors come in, they're astounded.
Yeah.
This is almost like a miracle. They check her out, said, "Okay, she can go home." And so we brought her back to the place, and I had just met Joanne, and that was 90, yeah, 91. So Joanne got to meet Mom, and her mom and Gertrude got a lunch together. But then what did she do? She fell again and was in a recuperation center when I was going to go to Mexico with Joanne. So that's when I called your brother and or your dad, my brother, and said, "Jim, could you take Mom while I'm gone?" Well, and she'd expressed a desire to see you guys, to watch you guys grow up. So this was quite good, quite acceptable to her.
Yeah.
She was really happy to go to Rockford.
Yeah. So I remember that from our perspective, because I was a young teenager at that, or maybe not even a teenager yet at that time, and I remember us coming out to California and spending a few days gathering up
Stuff.
just a few like a few suitcases,
Yeah.
if you will,
Yeah.
and then flying back with Grandma, getting her settled into
Yeah.
Wesley Willows.
Yeah. Wesley Willows. Maybe.
It wasn't Wesley Willows at first.
Yeah.
There was I don't remember the name of
Uh-huh.
the senior community she was in at first, but it wasn't. There was a thing where we put her in, but I don't think she liked it. I don't think we liked it. It happened to be closer than Wesley Willows, and then we eventually, after like a month or two, we were like,
Yeah.
this isn't gonna work, and we got her into a nicer facility named Wesley Willows, which is where she spent the rest of her days. But I distinctly remember after we got her settled in, we came back to California, and basically we needed to sell the house in Santa Rosa.
Yeah.
And we spent a week or two, um, ripping up carpet, throwing away golf clubs from the 50s, and that's when we found we found a secret stash of M80s all over the house, and then almost burned down the entire neighborhood. Yeah, that was that vacation, or not vacation. That was that trip to California. But yeah, that was so you had so that was how grandma or your mother ended up going from Santa Rosa to Rockford. But in the meantime, you have now mentioned Lynn, who is your current wife.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Joanne.
Joanne.
Joanne. Sorry, I messed that up.
Yeah.
She's gonna kill me when she watches this interview. So can you talk about where you met her, how that relationship started, and how long that's been going on?
Well, it was very interesting because I had been divorced for about 6 years. I was a single guy for about 6 years, from 85 to about 91. And surprisingly, Joanne had been a patient of mine, but she'd moved from Mill Valley to Santa Rosa. And I didn't really remember her at all. Well, I got a call from a good friend of mine's wife who said, "I have a lady I'd like you to meet. I think you guys would be a great match." And I said, "I don't know. 6 years I've been single. I kind of like being single, and every woman I've dated during that time, it's really been a bust. I don't know. You've got to meet this girl." Well, she pestered both, and she was a friend of Joanne's. They had met on the movie set at Tucker. They were both
Oh,
they were both extras in the movie, and they had didn't know each other before that, but they'd met and found out they both lived in Mill Valley. So much of the movie on Tucker is made at the Civic Center in San Francisco, even though it was supposed to be Chicago. So they would ride in together, and they became, well, what turns out to be lifelong friends. Well, Donnelly happened to meet one of my buddies. His name is George Sumner, and George is a well-known artist in the Bay Area. And George was a patient of mine, so there was kind of this interconnection. Well, she kept calling both of us because she's a real promoter. She's very good at marketing. And finally, I said to Donnelly, come on. She said, you no, I'm not letting up. So I called one night. I called Joanne, who I had totally forgotten, didn't think I knew ever. I said, look it, I didn't even introduce myself. I said, look it, if we don't go out on one date, we're never going to get rid of Donnelly. So I've got tickets to a jazz concert in Berkeley. Uh, you better go with me. And from Joanne's perspective, and you can check this out with her, she said, I wasn't really interested in going out with anybody either. But when he said jazz, she said, I hadn't found a guy who liked jazz in my single time.
yeah.
So she said, I decided I'd just go with him just for the jazz. And so we went to hear Wynton Marsalis at the
Ah,
Zellerbach.
yeah, okay.
And it it clicked. It was clicked. It just worked. That night we stayed out to 3 in the morning in a dive, college dive on College Avenue. Walked back to my car in a misty rain with some guy playing a saxophone, in the dark. I mean, it was just magical, and that magic has never ended.
And how many years has it been now?
30 some years.
30 some years. So can you talk about some of the trips that you two have been on, or
Oh,
some of the better moments?
the first trip was the trip that launched Gertrude to you in Rockford, because I had tickets for someone else, and I was going to go down to a friend of mine who lived in San Miguel, and he had invited me, and he'd been asking me, come on, got a nice place, you can stay here. Well, that woman that was originally I bought the ticket for backed out. I had just met Joanne a week or two before.
Yeah.
And we'd gone out a couple times because wow, it kind of was like a thunderbolt. So I said, oh, maybe she'd like to come. So I said, hey, I asked her, would you like to come with me to San Miguel? So
Yeah.
that was our very first trip. And we went to San Miguel, stayed, was wonderful. We clicked, everything was wonderful. And from that time on, let's see, we've been back to France 5 times, Germany, we traveled everywhere. And then I got her interested in camping. And she and her first husband had done camping in Europe. So she was a pretty seasoned traveler. And she had worked first as a teacher. She loved teaching, but when she got divorced, she had to find and she decided to move to California on her own. There was a teaching glut here, and she could not get a job. She could get part-time teaching, substitute teaching, but that wasn't enough to sustain her. So she eventually did a number of things, sold class rings and did other stuff. Eventually got on with Letterly Laboratories as a pharmaceutical rep, which required a lot of smarts,
Hmm.
and that's who she worked for. literally became Pfizer. Pfizer gobbled up a lot of smaller. And so for her, it was the right thing to do. And so when we first married and when we first met, she was then at that time a pharmaceutical rep.
Okay.
And to this day, we're friends with Donnelly and George. We get together, and I owe a lot to Donnelly because she called it.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. Yeah.
So,
And by the way, she also felt that Kim would be perfect for her first husband.
okay. Well, don't worry about it. You'll see it in the video.
So so Donnelly's batting 500 actually,
Okay.
because it didn't work out as happily for Kim as it did for me.
All right. All right. So, um, now you've married, got kids in Mill Valley. You've got a long, successful career. You've raised a family.
And by the way, Joanne had a daughter, one daughter from her first marriage, who is as dear to me as my kids.
What is her name?
Jennifer.
Jennifer. Okay, and she is in France. Is that correct?
No,
Oh,
no, Jennifer lives in Santa Rosa.
Oh, okay.
And the reason you can sleep in the room you're in today, or last night, was the fact that Jenny came over and helped Joanne clean the room out,
Okay.
so that you had a place
So
to
I
sleep.
had spots.
So you can thank Jenny for.
Okay.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
So when did you decide to make the move from Mill Valley to Santa Rosa?
We moved up here. We decided in 2015 we'd start looking because traffic was getting horrible.
So you retired in 2000.
2000.
And in 2015, so 15 years
Yeah,
in the Mill
yeah,
Valley, and
yeah.
traffic was
And
getting horrible.
thing just got awful. So I had been very resistant. I mean, I knew the area, and Joanne's folks had moved from Ohio to Oakmont. So I was, we'd go there for dinners and that. So I knew this area, but I didn't want to move where there were a bunch of old people living.
Yeah.
Till I realized I was old too.
Yeah. So you would have been 78 when you moved.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been here 10 years. Yeah, and I'm going to be 88 in September. Yeah, so I'm about maybe 77.
Will you take a picture of us?
Absolutely.
Quickly?
Portrait or landscape, doesn't matter.
Portrait.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll wrap this up soon.
Yeah, no. Take your time.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, I love that picture.
Oh,
Great.
yeah.
So are there any, so I've asked a lot of questions, but
Yeah.
is there anything like you want to talk about? Is there any like stories you'd like to tell? I know I heard a story last night at dinner of you getting lost in the woods and rescued while you were naked by a German fly fisherman.
Yeah.
Somewhere up in Montana.
Yeah,
That was pretty funny.
Yeah, the Bob Marshall Wilderness.
Yeah, the Bob Marshall Wilderness. You don't need to go into that one, but I figured I'd mention it for posterity.
Well,
You had an RV for a while.
oh yeah.
Hello.
You'll get to meet everybody. Yeah. I've been an RVer until Joanne said I've had it. And see, the logic was, do you realize how many B&Bs we could stay in for what we spend on just storage of the RV, let alone what it costs to buy one?
Mm-hmm.
But I was really into it big time because my first one was the one that I built in Germany that the wheels fell off.
Yes.
And then ever since that time, which is in the 60s, I had either a Volkswagen or a Ford cab over. I even had a Vixen. Now the Vixen was a strange and futuristic, and I may have mentioned it. It was built by DeLorean, and it had this. He had the same concept with the RV as for the the gull wings.
The gull wing doors. Yeah.
Excuse me a minute, Dave. I gotta get the propane tanks. Okay. So. All right.
Well, we're not ready yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I don't know. Can we? I'm going to have to do some things.
Yeah.
Think we can wrap this up?
Yeah. Okay. So I know grandkids. Who are your grandchildren?
Who are my
Who are
grandchildren?
your grandchildren?
Okay. Unfortunately, out of all the kids that I had, only one had grandchildren, and that's Kim, and she has a wonderful. She has a boy and a girl. Max is about six. How tall is Max? 6'4"?
I think 6'4". I think Frank's 6'3". I think he's 6'4", and Maya's like 6'2".
And Maya, the daughter who just graduated from high school, 6'2", drop dead gorgeous. You'll see her picture in the hallway. Yeah. And Jenny, who lives, as I said, in Santa Rosa, and is just wonderful. She's my bonus daughter. She has two twin. She has twin boys. They are 20. They're gifted musicians. They're going to Santa Rosa JC. It has this incredible music department, and they write their own music. They play multiple instruments. They're in a jazz combo. They are amazing. And so I have total 4 grandchildren, but they are all entertaining and they are all special in their own way. You know, Max is got a flair and a flamboyancy that is wonderful. I mean, he's a gay man, but he's just got so much style. And Maya, if you meet Maya, you'll be blown away. She has got chutzpah, and she's gorgeous. I mean, she's just tall, beautiful, blonde. And Jenny's got to they are so gifted as musicians. They're brilliant guys.
Yeah.
So anywhere I turn, I've got grandchildren that are just absolutely spectacular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Final thought. Is there anything you'd like to say to the universe? Any thoughts you'd like to put out there? This is a spotlight tough question that if you ask me, I would completely blank.
I've learned that in my 80 some years of life, what's really important is kindness, because kindness generates a certain empathy as well as understanding. And to me, that's one of the key components of love. So I'm big for kindness.
Okay. I think that is a great way to end this video. High five. All right.
That was wonderful.